I am. People are probably like, why is she on early? She's on 20 minutes early because I've got 3 freaking chapters to read. Excuse me, I am early. My stuff is scheduled to go off at 6 p.m. It is 5:42. I'm early. There is not going to be lingerie this evening. That is something totally different, Travis. We're reading Harry Potter. That's something for a different video that is not put together yet. All right. I did say 6:30. Okay, 6:30 your time. It's 5:42. I was helping a customer. I am a reliable source of your bath and body products. I take my time out of my day to take care of my customers when there are website issues. Always. Because we all know in retail, the customer comes first. All right, I have eaten pizza. I have my water. I am not drinking whiskey this evening. We are going to read 3 chapters. Okay, so we're going to read the rest of this tonight. It's a lot. Oh my goodness. And I need to take my hair down because ouch. Again, I was in the barn. I smell like horses. Okay, so we are about to enter the Chamber of Secrets. Customers are not terrible. Who the hell liked that? My customers come first. Plus today's the last day for that 10% off discount code. All right. Ooh, my hair looks pretty in this lighting. Freaking ombre crap going on. Did not do that on purpose. My hair just does that. Okay. I need some. Put the lotion on the skin, or it gets the hose again. That was not a child reference. Sorry. Okay. There we go. Chapter 16, The Chamber of Secrets. Now, this is a very interesting skull. Alright. You know, I post these videos on my YouTube as well, and people probably watch them and wonder, like, who the hell is she talking to? I'm talking to myself. All those times we were in that bathroom, and she was just 3 toilets away, said Ron bitterly at breakfast the next day. And we could have asked her. And now, it had been hard enough trying to look for spiders. Escaping their teachers long enough to sneak into a girl's bathroom, the girl's bathroom, moreover, right next to the scene of the first attack, was going to be almost impossible. But something happened in their first lesson, Transfiguration, which drove the Chamber of Secrets out of their minds for the first time in weeks. 10 minutes into the class, Professor McGonagall told them that their exams would start on the first day of June, 1 week from today. Exams? Howled Seamus Finnegan. We're still getting exams? There was a loud bang behind Harry as Neville Longbottom's wand slipped, vanishing one of the legs on his desks. Professor McGonagall restored it with a wave of her own wand and turned, frowning, to Seamus. The whole point of keeping the school open at this time is for you to receive your education, she said sternly. The exams will therefore take place as usual, and I trust you all are revising hard. Revising hard? It had never occurred to Harry that there would be exams with the castle in this state. There was a great deal of mutinous muttering around the room, which made Professor McGonagall scowl even more darkly. Professor Dumbledore's instructions were to keep the school running as normally as possible, she said. And that, I need hardly point out, means finding out how much you have learned this year. Harry looked down at the pair of white rabbits he was supposed to be turning into slippers. What had he learned so far this year? He couldn't seem to think of anything that would be useful in an exam. Ron looked as though he'd just been told he had to go and live in the Forbidden Forest. Can you imagine me taking exams with this? He asked Harry, holding up his wand, which had just started whistling loudly. 3 days before their first exam, Professor McGonagall made another announcement at breakfast. I have good news, she said, and the great hall, instead of falling silent, erupted. Dumbledore's coming back, several people yelled joyfully. You've caught the heir of Slytherin, squealed a girl at the Ravenclaw table. Quidditch matches are back on, roared Wood excitedly. When the hubbub had subsided, Professor McGonagall said, Professor Sprout has informed me that the mandrakes are ready for cutting at last. Tonight we will be able to revive those people who have been petrified. I need hardly remind you all that one of them may well be able to tell us who or what attacked them. I am hopeful that this dreadful year will end with us catching the culprit. There was an explosion of cheering. Harry looked at the Slytherin table and wasn't at all surprised to see that Draco Malfoy hadn't joined in. Ron, however, was looking happier than he'd looked in days. It won't matter that we never asked Myrtle then, he roared to Harry. Hermione will be here with all the answers when they wake her up. Mind you, she'll go mad when she finds out we've got exams in 3 days' time. She hasn't revised. It might be kinder to leave her where she is until they're over. Just then, Ginny Weasley came over and sat down next to Ron. She looked tense and nervous, and Harry noticed that her hands were twisting in her lap. What's up? Said Ron, helping himself to more porridge. Ginny didn't say anything, but glanced up and down the Gryffindor table with a scared look on her face that reminded Harry of someone, though he couldn't think who. Spit it out, said Ron, watching her. Harry suddenly realized who Ginny looked like. She was rocking backwards and forwards slightly in her chair, exactly like Dobby did when he was teetering on the edge of revealing forbidden information. I've got to tell you something, Ginny mumbled, carefully not looking at Harry. What is it? Said Harry. Ginny looked as though she couldn't find the right words. What? Said Ron. Ginny opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Harry leaned forward and spoke quietly so that only Ginny and Ron could hear him. Is it something about the Chamber of Secrets? Have you seen something? Someone acting oddly? Ginny drew a deep breath, and at that precise moment, Percy Weasley appeared, looking tired and wan. If you've finished eating, I'll take that seat, Ginny. I'm starving. I've only just come off patrol duty. Ginny jumped up as though her chair had been electrified, gave Percy a fleeting, frightened look, and scapered away. Percy sat down and grabbed a mug from the center of the table. Percy, said Ron angrily. She was just about to tell us something important. Halfway through a gulp of tea, Percy choked. What sort of thing? He said, coughing. I just asked her if she said anything odd, and she started to say, Oh, that's nothing to do with the Chamber of Secrets, said Percy at once. How do you know? Said Ron, his eyebrows raised. Well, if you must know, Ginny walked in on me the other day when I was... Well, never mind. The point is, she spotted me doing something, and I asked her not to mention it to anybody. I must say, I did think she'd keep her word. It's nothing, really. I'd just rather... Harry had never seen Percy look so uncomfortable. What were you doing, Percy? Said Ron, grinning. Go on, tell us. We won't laugh. Percy didn't smile back. Pass me those rolls, Harry. I'm starving. Harry knew the whole mystery would be solved tomorrow without their help, but he wasn't about to pass up the chance to speak to Myrtle if it turned up. And to his delight, it did, mid-morning, when they were being led to History of Magic by Gilderoy Lockhart. Lockhart, who had so often assured them that all danger had passed, only to be proved wrong straight away, was now wholeheartedly convinced that it was hardly worth the trouble to see them safely down the corridors. His hair wasn't as sleek as usual. It seemed he'd been up most of the night, patrolling the 4th floor. "Mark my words," he said, ushering them around the corner. "The first words out of those poor petrified people's mouths will be, 'It was Hagrid.' Frankly, I'm astounded Professor McGonagall thinks all these security measures are necessary." "I agree, sir," said Harry, making Ron drop his books in surprise. "Thank you, Harry," said Lockhart graciously while they waited for a long line of Hufflepuffs to pass. "I mean, we teachers have quite enough to be getting on with, without walking students to class and standing guard all night." "That's right," said Ron, catching on. "Why don't you leave us here, sir? We've only got one more corridor to go." "You know, Weasley, I think I will," said Lockhart. "I really should go and prepare for my next class." And he hurried off. "Prepare his class," Ron stared at him as he left. "Gone to curl his hair, more like." They let the rest of the Gryffindors draw ahead of them, and then darted down a side passage and hurried off towards Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. But just as soon as they were congratulating each other on their brilliant scheme, "Potter! Weasley! What are you doing here?" It was Professor McGonagall, and her mouth was the thinnest of thin lines. We were, Ron stammered. "We were going to see Hermione," said Harry. Ron and Professor McGonagall both looked at him. "We haven't seen her for ages, Professor," Harry went on hurriedly, treading on Ron's foot. "And we thought we'd sneak into the hospital wing, and tell her the mandrakes are nearly ready, and not to worry." Professor McGonagall, who was still staring at him, and for a moment Harry thought she was going to explode, but when she spoke, it was in a strangely croaky voice. "Of course," she said, and Harry, amazed, saw a tear glistening in her beady eye. "Of course. I realize this has all been hardest on the friends of those who have been... Well, I understand. Yes, Potter, of course you may visit Miss Granger. I will inform Professor Binns where you've gone. Tell Madame Pomfrey I gave you my permission." Harry and Ron walked away, hardly daring to believe that they'd avoided detention. As they turned the corner, they distinctly heard Professor McGonagall blow her nose. "That," said Ron fervently, "was the best story you've ever come up with." They had no choice now but to go to the hospital wing and tell Madame Pomfrey that they had Professor McGonagall's permission to visit Hermione. Madame Pomfrey let them in, but reluctantly. "There's just no point talking to a petrified person," she said, and they had to admit she was right when they'd taken their seats next to Hermione. It was plain that Hermione didn't have the faintest inkling that she had visitors, and that they might just as well tell her bedside cabinet not to worry for all the good it would do. "I wonder if she did see the attacker, though," said Ron, looking sadly at Hermione's rigid face. "Because if he sneaked up on them, no one will ever know." But Harry wasn't looking at Hermione's face. He was more interested in her right hand. It lay clenched on top of her blankets, and bending closer, he saw that a piece of paper was scrunched inside her fist. Making sure that Madame Pomfrey was nowhere near, he pointed this out to Ron. "Try and get it out," Ron whispered, shifting his chair so that he blocked Harry from Madame Pomfrey's view. It was no easy task. Hermione's hand was clamped so tightly around the paper that Harry was sure he was going to tear it. While Ron kept watch, he tugged and twisted, and at last, after several tense minutes, the paper came free. It was a page torn from a very old library book. Harry smoothed it out eagerly, and Ron leaned close to read it too. "Of the many fearsome beasts and monsters that roam our land, there is none more curious or more deadly than the basilisk, known also as the King of Serpents. This snake, which may reach gigantic size and live many hundreds of years, is born from a chicken egg, hatched beneath a toad. Its methods of killing are most wondrous, for aside from its deadly and venomous fangs, the basilisk has a murderous stare, and all who are fixed with the beam of its eyes shall suffer instant death. Spiders flee before the basilisk, for it is their mortal enemy, and the basilisk flees only from the crowing of the rooster, which is fatal to it." And beneath this, a single word had been written, in a hand Harry recognized as Hermione's. Pipes. The word was pipes. It was as though somebody had just flicked a light on in his brain. Ron, he breathed. This is it. This is the answer. The monster in the chamber is a basilisk, a giant serpent. That's why I've been hearing the voice all over the place and nobody else has heard it. It's because I understand Parseltongue. Harry looked up at the beds around him. The basilisk kills people by looking at them, but no one's died because no one's looked straight in the eyes. Colin saw it through his camera. The basilisk burned up all the film inside it, but Colin just got petrified. Justin must have seen the basilisk through nearly headless Nick. Nick got the full blast of it, but he couldn't die again. And Hermione and that Ravenclaw prefect were found with a mirror next to them. Hermione had just realized the monster was a basilisk. I bet you anything she warned the first person she met to look around corners with a mirror first. And that girl pulled out her mirror and... Ron's jaw had dropped. And Miss Norris? He whispered eagerly. Harry thought hard, picturing the scene on the night of Halloween. The water, he said slowly. The flood from Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. I bet you Miss Norris only saw the reflection. He scanned the page in his hand eagerly. The more he looked at it, the more it made sense. The basilisk flees only from the crowing of the rooster, which is fatal to it, he read aloud. Hagrid's roosters were killed. The heir of Slytherin didn't want one near the castle once the chamber was open. Spiders flee before the basilisk. It all fits. But how's the basilisk getting around the place? Said Ron. A dirty great snake? Someone would have seen. Harry, however, pointed at the word Hermione had scribbled at the foot of the page. Pipes, he said. Pipes! Ron, it's been using the plumbing. I've been hearing that voice inside the walls. Ron suddenly grabbed Harry's arm. The entrance to the chamber, he said hoarsely. What if it's a bathroom? What if it's in... Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, said Harry. They sat there, excitement coursing through them, hardly able to believe it. This means, said Harry, I can't be the only Parselmouth in the school. The heir of Slytherin's one too. That's how they've been controlling the basilisk. What are we going to do? Said Ron, whose eyes were flashing. Shall we go straight to McGonagall? Let's go to the staff room, said Harry, jumping up. She'll be there in 10 minutes. It's nearly break. They ran downstairs. Not wanting to be discovered hanging around in another corridor, they went straight into the deserted staff room. It was a large paneled room full of dark wooden chairs. Harry and Ron paced around it, too excited to sit down. But the bell to signal break never came. Instead, echoing through the corridors came Professor McGonagall's voice, magically magnified. All students to return to their house dormitories at once. All teachers return to the staff room. Immediately, please. Harry wheeled around to stare at Ron. Not another attack. Not now. What do we do? Said Ron, aghast. Go back to the dormitory? No, said Harry, glancing around. There was an ugly sort of wardrobe to his left, full of teachers' cloaks. In here. Let's hear what it's all about. Then we can tell them what we found out. They hid themselves inside it, listening for the rumbling of hundreds of people moving overhead, and the staff room door banging open. From between the musty folds of the cloaks, they watched the teachers filtering into the room. Some of them were looking puzzled, others downright scared. And then Professor McGonagall arrived. It has happened, she told the silent staff room. A student has been taken by the monster, right into the chamber itself. Professor Flitwick let out a squeal. Professor Sprout clapped her hands over her mouth. Snape gripped the back of a chair very hard and said, How can you be sure? The heir of Slytherin, said Professor McGonagall, who was very white, left another message, right underneath the first one. Her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever. Professor Flitwick burst into cheers. Who is it? Said Madame Hooch, who had sunk weak-kneed into a chair. Which student? Ginny Weasley, said Professor McGonagall. Harry felt Ron slide silently down onto the wardrobe floor beside him. We will have to send all of the students home tomorrow, said Professor McGonagall. This is the end of Hogwarts. Dumbledore always said... The staff room door banged open again. For one wild moment, Harry was sure it would be Dumbledore. But it was Lockhart, and he was beaming. So sorry, dozed off. What have I missed? He didn't seem to notice that the other teachers were looking at him with something remarkably like hatred. Snape stepped forward. Just the man, he said. The very man. A girl has been snatched by the monster, Lockhart, taken into the chamber itself. Your moment has come at last. Lockhart blanched. That's right, Gilderoy, chipped in Professor Sprout. Weren't you just saying last night that you've known all along where the entrance to the chamber is? I sputtered Lockhart. Yes, didn't you tell us that you were sure you knew what was inside it? Piped up Professor Flitwick. Did I? I don't recall. I certainly remember you saying you were sorry you hadn't had a crack at the monster before Hagrid was arrested, said Snape. Didn't you say that the whole affair had been bungled and that you should have been given free rein from the first? Lockhart stared round at his stony-faced colleagues. I really never... You may have misunderstood. We'll leave you to it then, Gilderoy, said Professor McGonagall. Tonight will be an excellent time to do it. We'll make sure everyone's out of your way. You'll be free to tackle the monster all by yourself. A free rein at last. Lockhart gazed desperately around him, but nobody came to the rescue. He didn't look remotely handsome anymore. His lip was trembling, and in the absence of his usually toothy grin, he looked weak-chinned and weedy. Very well, he said. I'll be in my office, getting ready. And he left the room. Right, said Professor McGonagall, whose nostrils had flared. That's got him out from under our feet. The heads of house shall go and inform their students what has happened. Tell them the Hogwarts Express will take them home first thing tomorrow. Will the rest of you please make sure no students have been left outside their dormitories? The teachers rose and left one by one. It was probably the worst day of Harry's entire life. He, Ron, Fred, and George sat together in the corner of the Gryffindor common room, unable to say anything to each other. Percy wasn't there. He had gone to send an owl to Mr. and Mrs. Weasley and then shut himself up in his dormitory. No afternoon had ever lasted as long as that one, nor had Gryffindor Tower ever been so crowded, yet so quiet. Near sunset, Fred and George went up to bed, unable to sit there any longer. She knew something, Harry, said Ron, speaking for the first time since they had entered the wardrobe in the staff room. That's why she was taken. It wasn't something stupid said, some stupid thing about Percy at all. She'd found out something about the Chamber of Secrets. Sorry. That must be why she was... Ron rubbed his eyes frantically. I mean, she was a pureblood. There can't be any other reason. Harry could see the sun sinking, blood red, below the skyline. This was the worst he had ever felt. If only there was something they could do. Anything. Harry, said Ron, do you think there's any chance at all she's not... Harry didn't know what to say. He couldn't see how Ginny could still be alive. Do you know what? Said Ron. I think we should go and see Lockhart. Tell him what we know. He's going to try and get into the chamber. We can tell him that we think... What? We can tell him where we think it is and tell him it's a basilisk in there. Because Harry couldn't think of anything else to do, and because he wanted to be doing something, he agreed. Oh, for having the window open. Now that I've stopped, I need water. The Gryffindors around them were so miserable and felt so sorry for the Weasleys that nobody tried to stop them as they got up, crossed the room, and left through the portrait hole. Darkness was falling as they walked down to Lockhart's office. There seemed to be a lot of activity going on inside it. They could hear scraping, thumps, and hurried footsteps. Harry knocked, and there was a sudden silence from inside. And then the door opened the tiniest crack, and they only saw one of Lockhart's eyes peering through it. "Oh, Mr. Potter, Mr. Weasley," he said, opening the door a mite wider. "I'm rather busy at the moment. If you would be quick." "Professor, we've got some information for you," said Harry. "We think it'll help you." Well, it's not terribly..." The side of Lockhart's face that they could see looked very uncomfortable. Well, all right." He opened the door, and they entered. His office had been almost completely stripped. 2 large trunks stood open on the floor. Robes, jade green, lilac, midnight blue, had been hastily folded into one of them. Books were jumbled untidily into the other. The photographs that had covered the walls were now crammed into boxes on desks. "Are you going somewhere?" said Harry. Well, yes," said Lockhart, ripping a life-size poster of himself from the back of the door as he spoke and starting to roll it up. "Urgent call, unavoidable, gotta go." "What about my sister?" said Ron jerkily. "Well, as to that, most unfortunate," said Lockhart, avoiding their eyes as he wrenched open a drawer and started emptying the contents into a bag. "No one regrets this more than I." "You're the defense against the dark arts teacher," said Harry. "You can't go now, not with all this dark stuff going on here." "Well, I must say, when I took the job," Lockhart muttered, now piling socks on top of his robes, "nothing in the job description didn't expect..." "You mean you're running away?" said Harry disbelievingly. "After all that stuff you did in your books?" "Books can be misleading," said Lockhart delicately. "You wrote them," said Harry. "My dear boy," said Lockhart, straightening up and frowning at Harry, "do use your common sense. My books wouldn't have sold half as well if people didn't think I'd done all those things. No one wants to read about some ugly old Araminian warlock, even if he did save a village from werewolves. He'd look dreadful on the front cover. No dress sense at all. And the witch who banished the abandoned banshee had a hairy chin. Come on." "So you've just been taking credit for what a load of other people have done?" said Harry incredulously. Harry, said Lockhart, shaking his head impatiently. "It's not nearly as simple as that. There was work involved. I had to track those people down, ask them exactly how they managed to do what they did. And then I put a memory charm on them so they wouldn't remember doing it. If there's one thing I pride myself on, it's my memory charms." "No, it's been a lot of work, Harry. It's not all book signings and publicity photos, you know. You want fame? You have to be prepared for a long, hard slog." He banged the lids of his trunk shut and locked them. "Let's see," he said. I think that's everything. Yes, only one thing left." He pulled out his wand and turned to them. "Awfully sorry, boys, but I'll have to put a memory charm on you now. Can't have you blabbing my secrets all over the place. I'd never sell another book." Harry reached his wand just in time. Lockhart had barely raised his when Harry bellowed, "Expelliarmus!" Lockhart was blasted backwards, falling over his trunk. His wand flew high into the air. Ron caught it and flung it out the window. "Shouldn't have let Professor Snape teach us that one," said Harry furiously, kicking Lockhart's trunk aside. Lockhart was looking up at him, weedy once more. Harry was still pointing his wand at him. "What do you want me to do?" said Lockhart weakly. "I don't know where the Chamber of Secrets is. There's nothing I can do." "Well, you're in luck," said Harry, forcing Lockhart to his feet at wand point. "We think we know where it is and what's inside it. So let's go." They marched Lockhart out of his office and down the nearest stairs, along the dark corridor where the message shone on the wall, to the door of Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. They sent Lockhart in first. Harry was pleased to see that he was shaking. Moaning Myrtle was sitting in the cistern at the end toilet. "Oh, it's you," she said when she saw Harry. "What do you want this time?" "To ask you how you died," said Harry. Myrtle's whole aspect changed at once. She looked as though she had never been asked such a flattering question. "Oh, it was dreadful," she said with relish. "It happened right here. I died in this very cubicle. I remember it so well. I'd hidden because Olive Hornby was teasing me about my glasses. The door was locked and I was crying, and then I heard somebody come in. They said something funny, a different language. I think it must have been. Anyway, what really got me was that it was a boy speaking. So I unlocked the door to tell him to go and use his own toilet, and then," Myrtle swelled importantly, her face shining, "I died." "How?" said Harry. "No idea," said Myrtle in hushed tones. "I just remember seeing a pair of great big yellow eyes. My whole body seized up, and then I was floating away." She looked dreamily at Harry. "And then I came back again. I was determined to haunt Olive Hornby, you see. Oh, she was sorry she'd ever laughed at my glasses." "Where exactly did you see the eyes?" said Harry. "Somewhere there," said Myrtle, pointing vaguely towards the sink in front of her toilet. Harry and Ron hurried over to look. Lockhart was standing well back, a look of utter terror on his face. It was just an ordinary sink. They examined every inch of it, inside and out, including the pipes below. And then Harry saw it. Scratched on the side of one of the copper taps was a tiny snake. "That tap's never worked," said Myrtle brightly, and as he tried to turn it. "Harry," said Ron, "say something. Something in Parseltongue." But Harry thought hard. The only times he'd ever managed to speak Parseltongue was when he'd been faced with a real snake. He stared hard at the tiny engraving, trying to imagine it was real. "Open up," he said. He looked at Ron, who shook his head. "English," he said. Harry looked back at the snake, willing himself to believe it was alive. If he moved his head, the candlelight made it look as though it was moving. "Open up," he said. Except the words weren't what he heard. A strange hissing had escaped him, and at once the tap glowed with a brilliant white light and began to spin. Next second, the sink began to move. The sink, in fact, sank right out of sight, leaving a large pipe exposed, a pipe wide enough for a man to slide into. Harry heard Ron gasp and looked up again. He'd made up his mind what he was going to do. "I'm going down there," he said. He couldn't go now, not now that they found the entrance to the chamber, not if there was even the faintest, slimmest, wildest chance that Ginny might be alive. "Me too," said Ron. There was a pause. "Well, you hardly seem to need me," said Lockhart, with a shadow of his old smile. "I'll just—" He put his hand on the doorknob, but Ron and Harry both pointed their wands at him. "You go first," Ron snarled. White-faced and wandless, Lockhart approached the opening. "Boys," he said, his voice feeble, "boys, what good will it do?" Harry jabbed him in the back with his wand. Lockhart slid his legs into the pipe. "I really don't think," he started to say, but Ron gave him a push, and he slid out of sight. Harry followed quickly. He lowered himself slowly into the pipe and then let go. It was like rushing down an endless, slimy, dark slide. He could see more pipes branching off in all directions, but none as large as theirs, which twisted and turned, sloping steeply downward. And then he knew that he was falling deeper below the school than even the dungeons. Behind him, he could hear Ron thudding slightly at the curves. And then, just as he had begun to worry about what would happen when he hit the ground, the pipe leveled out, and he shot out the end with a wet thud, landing on the damp floor of a dark stone tunnel, large enough to stand in. Lockhart was getting to his feet a little ways away, covered in slime and white as a ghost. Harry stood aside as Ron came whizzing out of the pipe, too. "We must be miles under the school," said Harry, his voice echoing in the black tunnel. "Under the lake, probably," said Ron, squinting around at the dark, slimy walls. All three of them turned to stare at the darkness ahead. "Lumos," Harry muttered at his wand and lit it again. "Come on," he said to Ron and Lockhart, and off they went, their footsteps slapping loudly on the wet floor. The tunnel was so dark that they could only see a little distance ahead. Their shadows on the wet walls looked monstrous in the wandlight. "Remember," Harry said quietly as they walked cautiously forward, "any sign of movement, close your eyes straight away." But the tunnel was quiet as a grave, and the first unexpected sound they heard was a loud crunch as Ron stepped on what turned out to be a rat's skull. Harry lowered his wand and looked at the floor and saw that it was littered with small animal bones. Trying very hard not to imagine that what Ginny might look like when he found her, Harry led the way forward, round a dark bend in the tunnel. "Harry, there's something up there," said Ron hoarsely, grabbing Harry's shoulder. They froze, watching. Harry could just see the outline of something huge and curved lying right across the tunnel. It wasn't moving. "Maybe it's asleep," he breathed, glancing back at the other two. Lockhart's hands were pressed over his eyes. Harry turned back to look at this thing, his heart beating so fast it hurt. Very slowly, his eyes as narrow as he could make them and still see, Harry edged forward, his wand held high. The light slid over a gigantic snake skin of a vivid, poisonous green, laying curled and empty across the tunnel floor. The creature that had shed this must have been 20 feet long at least. "Blimey," said Ron weakly. There was sudden movement behind them. Gilderoy Lockhart's knees had given way. "Get up," said Ron sharply, pointing his wand at Lockhart. Lockhart got to his feet, and then he dived at Ron, knocking him to the ground. Harry jumped forward, but too late. Lockhart was standing up, panting, Ron's wand in his hand and a gleaming smile back on his face. "The adventure ends here, boys," he said. "I shall take a bit of this skin back up to the school and tell them that I was too late to save the girl, and that you two tragically lost your minds at the sight of her mangled body. Say goodbye to your memories." He raised Ron's spello-taped wand high above his head and yelled, "Obliviate!" The wand exploded with the force of a small bomb. Harry flung his arm around his head and ran, slipping over the coils of snakeskin and out of the way of great chunks of ceiling falling, which were thundering to the floor. The next moment, he was standing alone, gazing at a solid wall of broken rock. "Ron!" he shouted. "Are you okay? Ron!" "I'm here," came Ron's muffled voice from behind the rockfall. "I'm okay. This gets not, though. He got blasted by the wand." There was a dull thud and a loud ow. It sounded as though Ron had just kicked Lockhart in the shins. "What now?" Ron's voice said, sounding desperate. "We can't get through. It'll take ages." Harry looked up at the tunnel ceiling. Huge cracks had appeared in it. He had never tried to take apart anything as large as these rocks by magic, and now didn't seem like a good time to try. What if the whole tunnel caved in? There was another thud and another ow from behind the rocks. They were wasting time. Ginny had already been in the Chamber of Secrets for hours. Harry knew that there was only one thing to do. "Wait here," he called to Ron. "Wait with Lockhart. I'll go on. If I'm not back in an hour..." There was a very pregnant pause. "I'll try and shift some of these rocks," said Ron, who seemed to be trying to keep his voice steady. "So you can get back through. And Harry?" "See you in a bit," said Harry, trying to inject some confidence into his shaking voice. And then he set off alone, past the giant snakeskin. Soon the distant noise of Ron straining to shift the rocks was gone. The tunnel turned and turned again. Every nerve in Harry's body was tingling unpleasantly. He wanted the tunnel to end, yet dreaded what he'd find when it did. And then, at last, he crept around yet another bend. He saw a solid wall ahead, on which 2 entwined serpents were carved, their eyes set with great glinting emeralds. Harry approached. His throat was dry. There was no need to pretend that these stone snakes were real. Their eyes looked strangely alive. He could guess what he had to do. He cleared his throat, and the emerald eyes seemed to flicker. "Open," said Harry in a low, faint hiss. It's the best I can do. Sss. The serpents parted on the cracked wall. The serpents parted as the wall cracked open. The halves slid smoothly out of sight, and Harry, shaking from head to foot, walked inside. Bottoms up. It's just water. Yep, that happened on camera. Okay. Refreshing. Chapter 17. The Heir of Slytherin. I wish my eyes looked like that. They'd be creepy. Mr. Spot. That's probably a good idea, Justin. If you had chosen the name Harry the entire time, you probably would still be drunk, like, every time you're listening to this. It's a freaking Harry Potter book. Ooh. My eyes do look pretty today. It's the light glinting off them. Alright. The Heir of Slytherin. Harry was staring at the end of a very long, dimly lit chamber. Towering stone pillars entwined with more carved serpents rose to support a ceiling lost in darkness, casting long black shadows through the odd greenish gloom that filled the place. His heart beating very fast, Harry stood listening to the chill silence. Could the basilisk be lurking in a shadowy corner behind a pillar? And where was Ginny? Aw, I love you, Angie. He pulled out his wand and moved forward between the serpentine columns. Every careful footstep echoed loudly off the shadowy walls. He kept his eyes narrowed, ready to clamp them shut at the smallest sign of movement. The hollow eye sockets of the stone snakes seemed to be following him. More than once, with the jolt of the stomach, he thought he saw one stir. Then, as he drew level with the last pair of pillars, a statue high as the chamber itself loomed into view, standing against the back wall. Harry had to crane his neck to look up into the giant face above. It was ancient and monkey-like, with a long, thin beard that fell almost to the middle of the wizard's sweeping robes. where 2 enormous gray feet stood on the smooth chamber floor. And between the feet, face down, lay a small black-robed figure with flaming red hair. "Ginny," Harry muttered, sprinting to her and dropping to his knees. "Ginny, don't be dead. Please don't be dead." He flung his wand aside and grabbed Ginny's shoulders and turned her over. Her face was white as marble and cold, yet her eyes were closed, so she wasn't petrified. But then she must be... "Ginny, please wake up," Harry muttered desperately, shaking her. Ginny's head lolled hopelessly from side to side. "She won't wake up," said a soft voice. Harry jumped and spun around on his knees. A tall, black-haired boy was leaning against the nearest pillar, watching. He was strangely blurred around the edges, as though Harry was looking at him through a misted window. But there was no mistaking him. Tom Riddle? Riddle nodded, not taking his eyes off Harry's face. "What do you mean she won't wake?" Harry said desperately. She's not... "She's alive," said Riddle, "but only just." Harry stared at him. Tom Riddle had been at Hogwarts 50 years ago. Yet here he stood, a weird, misty light shining about him, not a day older than 16. "Are you a ghost?" said Harry uncertainly. "A memory," said Riddle quietly, "perfectly preserved in a diary for 50 years. He pointed towards the floor near the statue's giant toes. Lying open there was the little black diary Harry had found in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. For a second, Harry wondered how it got there. But there were more pressing matters to deal with. "You've got to help me, Tom," Harry said, raising Ginny's head again. "We've got to get her out of here. There's a basilisk. I don't know where it is, but it could be along any moment. Please, help me." Riddle didn't move. Harry, sweating, managed to hoist Ginny off the floor and bent to pick up his wand again. But his wand had gone. "Did you see?" He looked up. Riddle was still watching him, twirling Harry's wand between his long fingers. "Thanks," said Harry, stretching out his hand for it. A smile curled around the corners of Riddle's mouth. He continued to stare at Harry, twirling the wand idly. "Listen," said Harry urgently, his knees sagging with Ginny's dead weight. "We've got to go. If the basilisk comes..." "It won't come until it's called," said Riddle calmly. Harry lowered Ginny back onto the floor, unable to hold her any longer. "What do you mean?" he said. "Look, give me my wand. I might need it." Riddle's smile broadened. "Oh, you won't be needing it," he said. Harry stared at him. "What do you mean I won't be..." "I've waited a long time for this, Harry Potter," said Riddle. "For the chance to see you, to speak to you." "Look," said Harry, losing his patience, "I don't think you get it. We're in the Chamber of Secrets. We can talk later." "We're going to talk now," said Riddle, still smiling broadly as he pocketed Harry's wand. Harry stared at him. There was something very funny going on here. "How did Jenny get like this?" he asked slowly. "Well, that's an interesting question," said Riddle pleasantly, "and quite a long story. I suppose the real reason Ginny Weasley's like this is because she opened her heart and spilled all of her secrets to an invisible stranger." "What are you talking about?" said Harry. "The diary," said Riddle. "My diary. Little Ginny's been writing in it for months and months, telling me all of her pitiful worries and woes, how her brothers tease her, how she had to come to school with second-hand robes and books, how," Riddle's eyes glinted, "how she didn't think famous, good, great Harry Potter would ever like her." All the time he spoke, Riddle's eyes never left Harry's face. There was an almost hungry look in them. "It's very boring having to listen to the silly troubles of an 11-year-old girl," he went on, "but I was patient. I wrote back. I was sympathetic. I was kind. Ginny simply loved me. No one's ever understood me like you, Tom. I'm so glad I've got this diary to confide in. It's like having a friend I can carry around in my pocket." Riddle laughed, a high, cold laugh that didn't suit him, and it made the hairs on the back of Harry's neck stand up. "If I say it myself, Harry, I've always been able to charm the people I needed. So Ginny poured out her soul to me, and her soul happened to be exactly what I wanted. I grew stronger and stronger on a diet of her deepest fears, her darkest secrets. I grew powerful, far more powerful than little Miss Weasley. Powerful enough to start feeding Miss Weasley a few of my secrets, to start pouring a little of my soul back into her." "What do you mean?" said Harry, whose mouth had gone very dry. "Haven't you guessed it, Harry Potter?" said Riddle softly. "Ginny Weasley opened the Chamber of Secrets. She strangled the school roosters and daubed threatening messages on the walls. She set the serpent of Slytherin on 4 mudbloods and the squib's cat." "No," whispered Harry. "Yes," said Riddle calmly. "Of course, she didn't know what she was doing at first. It was very amusing. I wish I could see her new diary entries. I wish you could have seen her new diary entries. Far more interesting they became. Dear Tom," he recited, watching Harry's horrified face, "I think I'm losing my memory. There are rooster feathers all over my robes, and I don't know how they got there. Dear Tom, I can't remember what I did on the night of Halloween, but a cat was attacked, and I've got paint all down my front. Dear Tom, please, Percy keeps telling me I'm pale and I'm not myself. I think he suspects me. There was another attack today, and I don't know where I was. Tom, what am I going to do? I think I'm going mad. I think I'm the one attacking everyone, Tom." Harry's fists were clenched, the nails digging deep into his palms. "It took a very long time for stupid little Ginny to stop trusting her diary," said Riddle. "But she finally became suspicious and tried to dispose of it. And that's where you came to find it, Harry. You found it, and I couldn't have been more delighted. Of all the people who could have picked it up, it was you. The very person I was most anxious to meet." "Why did you want to meet me?" said Harry. Anger was coursing through him, and it was an effort to keep his voice steady. "Well, you see, Ginny told me all about you, Harry," said Riddle. "Your whole fascinating history." His eyes roved over the lightning scar on Harry's forehead, and his expression grew hungrier. "I knew I must find out more about you. Talk to you, meet you if I could. So I decided to show you my famous capture of the great oaf Hagrid to gain your trust." "Hagrid's my friend," said Harry, his voice now shaking. "And you framed him, didn't you?" "I thought you made a mistake, but—" Riddle laughed his high laugh again. "It was my word against Hagrid's, Harry. Well, you can imagine how it looked to old Armado Dippet. On one hand, Tom Riddle, poor but brilliant, parentless but so brave, school prefect, model student. On the other hand, big, blundering Hagrid, in trouble every other week, trying to raise werewolf cubs under his bed, sneaking off to the Forbidden Forest to wrestle the trolls. But I admit, even I was surprised how well the plan worked. I thought someone must realize that Hagrid couldn't possibly be the heir of Slytherin. It had taken me 5 whole years to find out everything I could about the Chamber of Secrets, and discover the secret entrance. As though Hagrid had the brains or the power. Hang on. Ooh. Only the Transfiguration teacher, Dumbledore, seemed to think Hagrid was innocent. He persuaded Dippet to keep Hagrid and train him as gamekeeper. Yes, I think Dumbledore might have guessed. Dumbledore never seemed to like me as much as the other teachers did. I bet Dumbledore saw right through you, said Harry, his teeth gritted. Well, he certainly kept an annoyingly close watch on me after Hagrid was expelled, said Riddle carelessly. I knew it wouldn't be safe to open the chamber again while I was still at school, but I wasn't going to waste those years I'd spent searching for it. I decided to leave behind a diary, preserving my 16-year-old self in its pages, so that one day, with luck, I would be able to lead another in my footsteps and finish Salazar Slytherin's noble work. Well, you haven't finished yet, said Harry triumphantly. No one's died this time, not even a cat. In a few hours, the Mandrake draft will be ready, and everyone who is petrified will be all right again. Now I unzipped my pants. I'm wearing jeans. Haven't I already told you, said Riddle quietly, that killing mudbloods doesn't matter to me anymore? For many months now, my new target has been you. Harry stared at him. Imagine how angry I was when the next time my diary was opened, it was Ginny who was writing to me, and not you. She saw you with the diary, you see, and panicked. What if you found out how it worked, and I repeated all of her secrets to you? What if, even worse, I told you who'd been strangling roosters? So the foolish little brat waited until your dormitory was deserted and stole it back. But I knew what I must do. It was clear to me that you were on the trail of Slytherin's heir. From everything Ginny had told me about you, I knew you would go to any lengths to solve the mystery, particularly if one of your best friends was attacked. And Ginny had told me the whole school was buzzing because you could speak Parseltongue. So I made Ginny write her own farewell on the wall and come down here to wait. She struggled and cried and became very boring. But there isn't much life left in her. She put too much into the diary, into me. Enough to let me leave its pages at last. I've been waiting for you to appear since we arrived here. I knew you'd come. I have many questions for you, Harry Potter. Like what? Said Harry, fist still clenched. Well, said Riddle, smiling pleasantly, how is it that a baby with no extraordinary magical talent managed to defeat the greatest wizard of all time? How did you escape with nothing but a scar, while Lord Voldemort's powers were destroyed? There was an odd red gleam in his hungry eyes now. Why do you care how I escaped? Said Harry slowly. Voldemort was after your time. Voldemort, said Riddle softly, is my past, present, and future, Harry Potter. He pulled Harry's wand from his pocket and began to trace through the air, writing 3 shimmering words. Tom Marvolo Riddle. And then he waved the wand once, and the letters of his name rearranged themselves. I am Lord Voldemort. You see, he whispered, it was a name I was already using at Hogwarts, to my most intimate friends only, of course. You think I was going to use my filthy muggle father's name forever? I, in whose veins ran the blood of Salazar Slytherin himself, through my mother's side? I keep the name of a common foul muggle who abandoned me even before I was born just because he found out his wife was a witch? No, Harry. I fashioned myself a new name. A name I knew wizards everywhere would one day fear to speak, when I became the greatest sorcerer of the world. Harry's brain seemed to have jammed. He stared numbly at Riddle, at the orphan boy who had grown up to murder Harry's own parents and so many others. At last, he forced himself to speak. You're not, he said, his voice full of hatred. Not what? Snapped Riddle. Not the greatest sorcerer in the world, said Harry, breathing fast. Sorry to disappoint you, but the greatest wizard in the world is Albus Dumbledore. Everyone says so. Even when you were strong, you didn't dare try and take over Hogwarts. Dumbledore saw through you when you were at school, and he still frightens you now, wherever you're hiding these days. The smile had gone from Riddle's face and was now replaced by a very angry look. Dumbledore's been driven out of this castle by the mere memory of me, he hissed. He's not as gone as you might think, Harry retorted. He was speaking at random, wanting to scare Riddle, wishing rather than believing it to be true. Riddle opened his mouth, but froze. Music was coming from somewhere. Riddle whirled around to stare down the empty chamber. The music was growing louder. It was eerie, spine-tingling, unearthly. It lifted the hairs on Harry's scalp and made his heart feel as though it was swelling to twice its normal size. He was having a Grinch moment. Then, as the music reached such a pitch that Harry felt it vibrating inside his own ribs, flames erupted at the top of the nearest pillar. A crimson bird the size of a swan had appeared, piping its weird music to the vaulted ceiling. It had a glittering golden tail as long as a peacock's, and gleaming golden talons which were gripping a ragged bundle. A second later, the bird was flying straight at Harry. It dropped the ragged thing it was carrying at its feet, and then landed heavily on his shoulder. As it folded its great wings, Harry looked up and saw that it had a long, sharp, golden beak and beady black eyes. The bird stopped singing. It just sat still and warm next to Harry's cheek, gazing steadily at Riddle. That's a phoenix, said Riddle, staring shrewdly back at it. Fox? Harry breathed, and he felt the bird's golden paws squeeze his shoulders gently. And that, said Riddle, now eyeing the ragged thing that Fox had dropped, that's the old school sorting hat. So it was. Patched, frayed, and dirty, the hat lay motionless at Harry's feet. Riddle began to laugh again. He laughed so hard the dark chamber rang with it, as though 10 Riddles were laughing at once. This is what Dumbledore sends his defender? A songbird and an old hat. Do you feel brave, Harry Potter? Do you feel safe now? Harry didn't answer. He might not see what use Fox or the sorting hat were, but he was no longer alone, and he waited with mounting courage for Riddle to stop laughing. All right, to business, Harry, said Riddle, still smiling broadly. Twice, in your past, in my future, we have met, and twice I failed to kill you. How did you survive? Tell me everything. The longer we talk, he added softly, the longer you stay alive. Harry was thinking fast, weighing his chances. Riddle had the wand. He, Harry, had Fox and the sorting hat, neither of which would be much good in a duel. It looked bad, all right, but the longer Riddle stood there, the more life was dwindling out of Ginny. And in the meantime, Harry noticed suddenly Riddle's outline was becoming clearer, more solid. If it had to be a fight between him and Riddle, better sooner than later. No one knows why you lost your powers when you attacked me, said Harry abruptly. I don't know myself, but I know why you couldn't kill me. Because my mother died to save me. My common, muggle-born mother, he added, shaking with suppressed rage. She stopped you killing me. And I've seen the real you. I saw you last year. You're a wreck. You're barely alive. That's where all your power got you. You're in hiding. You're ugly. You're foul. Riddle's face contorted, and then he forced it into an awful smile. So, your mother died to save you. Yes, that's a powerful counter-charm, I can see now. There's nothing special about you. I wondered, you see, because there are strange likenesses between us. Harry Potter. Even you must have noticed. Both half-bloods, orphans, raised by muggles. Probably the only two Parselmouths to come to Hogwarts since the great Salazar himself, the great Slytherin himself. We even look something alike. But after all, it was merely a lucky chance that saved you from me. That's all I wanted to know. Harry stood tense, waiting for Riddle to raise his wand. But Riddle's twisted smile was widening again. Now, Harry, I'm going to teach you a little lesson. Let's match the powers of Lord Voldemort, heir of Salazar Slytherin, against famous Harry Potter, and the best weapon Dumbledore can give him. He cast an amused glance at Fawkes and the Sorting Hat, and then walked away. Harry, fear spreading up his numb legs, watched Riddle stop between the high pillars and look up at the stone face of Slytherin, high above him in the half-darkness. Riddle opened his mouth wide and hissed, but Harry understood what he was saying. Speak to me, Slytherin, greatest of the Hogwarts Four. Harry wheeled around to look up at the statue, Fawkes swaying on his shoulder. Slytherin's gigantic stone face was moving. Horror-struck, Harry saw his mouth opening wider and wider to make a huge black hole. And something was stirring inside the statue's mouth. Something was slithering up from its depths. Harry backed away until he hit the dark chamber wall, and as he shut his eyes tight, he felt Fawkes' wings swipe his cheek as he took flight. Harry wanted to shout, "Don't leave me!" But what chance did a phoenix have against the King of Serpents? Something huge hit the stone floor of the chamber. Harry felt it shudder. He knew what was happening. He could sense it, could almost see the giant serpent uncoiling itself around Slytherin's mouth. And then he heard Riddle's hissing voice. Kill him. The basilisk was moving towards Harry. He could hear its heavy body slithering ponderously across the dusty floor. Eyes still tightly shut, Harry began to run blindly sideways, his hands outstretched, feeling his way. Riddle was laughing. Harry tripped. He fell hard onto the stone and tasted blood. The serpent was barely feet from him. He could hear it coming. There was a loud, explosive spitting sound right above him, and then suddenly, something heavy hit Harry so hard he was smashed against the wall. Waiting for fangs to sink through his body, he heard more mad hissing and something thrashing wildly off the pillars. No picture. He couldn't help it. He opened his eyes wide enough to squint at what was going on. The enormous serpent, bright, poisonous green, thick as an oak trunk, had raised itself half in the air, and its great blunt head was waving drunkenly between the pillars. As Harry trembled, ready to close his eyes if it turned, he saw what had distracted the snake. Fawkes was soaring around its head, and the basilisk was snapping furiously at him with fangs, long and thin as sabers. Fawkes dived. His long golden beak sank out of sight, and a sudden shower of dark blood splattered the floor. The snake's tail thrashed, narrowly missing Harry, and before Harry could shut his eyes, it turned. Harry looked straight into its face and saw that its eyes, both its great bulbous yellow eyes, had been punctured by the phoenix. Blood was streaming to the floor, and the snake was spitting in agony. "No!" Harry heard Riddle screaming. "Leave the bird! Leave the bird! The boy is behind you. You can still smell him. Kill him!" The blind serpent swayed, confused, but still deadly. Fawkes was circling its head, piping its eerie song, jabbing here and there at the basilisk's scaly nose as blood poured from its ruined eyes. "Help me! Help me!" Harry muttered wildly. "Someone! anyone. The snake's tail whipped across the floor again. Harry ducked. Something soft hit his face. The basilisk had swept the sorting hat into Harry's arms. Harry seized it. It was all he had left, his only chance. He rammed it onto his head and threw himself flat against the floor as the basilisk's tail swung over him again. Help me, Harry thought, his eyes screwed tight under the hat. Please help. But there was no answering voice. Instead, the hat contracted as though an invisible hand was squeezing it very tightly. Something very hard and very heavy thudded on top of Harry's head, almost knocking him out. Stars winking in front of his eyes, he grabbed the top of the hat and pulled it off, and felt something long and hard beneath it. A gleaming silver sword had appeared inside the hat. Its handle glinted with rubies the size of eggs. Kill the boy. Leave the bird. The boy is behind you. Sniff. Smell him. That's starting to hurt my throat. Harry was on his feet, ready. The basilisk's head was falling, its body coiling around, hitting pillars as it twisted to face Harry. He could see the vast, bloody eye sockets, see the mouth stretching wide enough to swallow him whole, lined with fangs long as his sword, thin, glittering, venomous. It lunged blindly. Harry dodged, and it hit the chamber wall. It lunged again, and its forked tongue lashed Harry's side. He raised the sword in both hands. The basilisk lunged again. This time, its aim was true. Harry threw his whole weight behind the sword and drove it into the roof of the mouth of the servant. Harry threw his whole weight behind the sword and drove it to the hilt into the roof of the serpent's mouth. There we go. And as the warm blood drenched Harry's arms, he felt a searing pain just above his elbow. One long, poisonous fang was sinking deeper and deeper into his arm, and it splintered as the basilisk keeled over sideways and fell, twitching, to the floor. Harry slid down the wall. He gripped the fang that was spreading poison through his body and wrenched it out of his arm, but he knew it was too late. White, hot pain was spreading slowly and steadily from the wound. Even as he dropped the fang and watched his own blood soaking his robes, his vision went foggy. The chamber was dissolving in a whirl of dull color. A patch of scarlet swam past, and Harry heard a soft clatter of claws beside him. "Fawkes," said Harry thickly. "You were brilliant, Fawkes." Harry felt the bird lay its beautiful head on the spot where the serpent's fang had pierced him. He could hear echoing footsteps and in the dark shadow moving in front of him. "You're dead, Harry Potter," said Riddle's voice above him. "Dead. Even Dumbledore's bird knows it. Do you see what he's doing, Potter? He's crying." Harry blinked. Fawkes's head slid in and out of focus. Thick, pearly tears were trickling down the glossy feathers. "I'm going to sit here and watch you die, Harry Potter. Take your time. I'm in no hurry." Harry felt drowsy. Everything around him seemed to be spinning. "So ends the famous Harry Potter," said Riddle's distant voice. "Alone in the Chamber of Secrets. Forsaken by his friend, defeated at last by the Dark Lord he so unwisely challenged. You'll be back with your dear mudblood mother soon, Harry. She brought you 12 years of borrowed time, but Lord Voldemort got you in the end, as you knew he must." If this is dying, thought Harry, it's not so bad. Even the pain was leaving him. But was this dying? Instead of going black, the chamber seemed to be coming back into focus. Harry gave his head a little shake, and there was Fawkes, still resting his head on Harry's arm. A pearly patch of tears was shining all around the wound, except there was no wound. "Get away, bird," said Riddle's voice suddenly. "Get away from him! I said get away!" Harry raised his head. Riddle was pointing Harry's wand at Fawkes, and there was a bang like a gun, and Fawkes took flight again in a whirl of gold and scarlet. Ooh, pretty picture. Well, scary picture. Okay. See the feather? Harry Potter? The sword? Creepy, ugly basilisk. Oh. There it is. Hang on. You see Fawkes down there? Right here. Phoenix tears, said Riddle quietly, staring at Harry's arm. Of course. Healing powers. I forgot. He looked at Harry's face. But it makes no difference. In fact, I prefer it this way. Just you and me, Harry Potter. You and me. He raised the wand. Then, in a rush of wings, Fawkes soared back overhead and something fell into Harry's lap. The diary. For a split second, both Harry and Riddle, wand still raised, stared at it. And then, without thinking, without considering, as though he had meant to do it all along, Harry seized the basilisk fang on the floor next to him and plunged it straight into the heart of the book. There was a long, dreadful, piercing scream. Ink spurted out of the diary in torrents, streaming over Harry's hands, flooding the floor. Riddle was writhing and twisting, screaming and flailing, and then he had gone. Harry's wand fell to the floor with a clatter, and there was silence. Silence except for the steady drip-drip of ink still oozing from the diary. The basilisk venom had burned a sizzling hole straight through it. Shaking all over, Harry pulled himself up. His head was spinning as though he'd just traveled miles by flue powder. Slowly, he gathered together his wand and the sorting hat, and with a huge tug, retrieved the glinting sword from the roof of the basilisk's mouth. Then came a faint moan from the end of the chamber. Ginny was stirring. As Harry hurried towards her, she sat up. Her bemused eyes traveled from the huge form of the dead basilisk, over Harry in his blood-soaked robes, and then to the diary in his hand. She gave a great shuddering gasp, and tears began to pour down her face. Harry! Oh, Harry, I tried to tell you at breakfast, but I couldn't say it in front of Percy. It was me, Harry. But I swear I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to. Riddle made me. He took me over, and how did you kill the thing? Where's Riddle? The last thing I remember is him coming out of the diary. It's all right, said Harry, holding up the diary and showing Ginny the fang hole. Riddle's finished. Look, him and the basilisk. Come on, Ginny, let's get out of here. I'm gonna be expelled, said Ginny, as Harry helped her awkwardly to his feet. I've looked forward to coming to Hogwarts ever since Bill came, and now I'll have to leave, and what'll Mom and Dad say? Fawkes was waiting for them, hovering in the chamber entrance. Harry urged Ginny forward. They stepped over the motionless coils of the dead basilisk, through the echoing gloom, and back into the tunnel. Harry heard the stone doors close behind them with a soft hiss. After a few moments' progress in the dark tunnel, a distant sound of slowly shifting rocks reached Harry's ears. Ron! Harry yelled, speeding up. Ginny's okay! I've got her! He heard Ron gave a strangled cheer, and they turned the next bend to see his eager face staring through the sizable gap he had managed to make in the rock fall. Ginny! Ron thrust an arm through the gap in the rock to pull her through first. You're alive! I don't believe it! What happened? He tried to hug her, but Ginny held him off, sobbing. But you're okay, Ginny, said Ron, beaming at her. It's over now. Where did that bird come from? Fawkes was swooping through the gap after Ginny. He's Dumbledore's, said Harry, squeezing himself through. And how come you've got a sword? Said Ron, gasping at the glittering weapon in Harry's hand. I'll explain when we get out of here, said Harry, with a sideways glance at Ginny. But later, Harry said quickly. He didn't think it was a good idea to tell Ron yet, who had been opening the chamber. Not in front of Ginny, anyway. Where's Lockhart? Back there, said Ron, grinning and jerking his head up the tunnel towards the pipe. He's in a bad way. Come and see. Led by Fawkes, whose wide scarlet eyes emitted a soft golden glow in the darkness, they walked all the way back to the mouth of the pipe. Gilderoy Lockhart was there, humming placidly to himself. His memory's gone, said Ron. The memory charm backfired. Hit him instead of us. Hasn't got a clue who he is, or where he is, or who we are. I told him to come and wait here. He's a danger to himself. Lockhart peered good-naturedly up at them all. Hello, he said. Odd sort of place, this, isn't it? Do you live here? No, said Ron, raising his eyebrows at Harry. Harry bent down and looked up the long, dark pipe. Have you thought how we're going to get back up through this? He said to Ron. Ron shook his head. But Fawkes the Phoenix had swooped past Harry and was now fluttering in front of him, his beady eyes bright in the dark. He was waving his long golden tail feathers. Harry looked uncertainly at him. He looks like he wants you to grab hold, said Ron, looking perplexed. But you're much too heavy for a bird to pull up there. Fawkes, said Harry, isn't an ordinary bird. He turned quickly to the others. We've got to hold on to each other. Ginny, grab Ron's hand. Professor Lockhart? That means you, said Ron sharply to Lockhart. You hold Ginny's other hand. Harry tucked the sword and the sorting hat into his belt. Ron took hold of the back of Harry's robes, and Harry reached out and took hold of Fawkes's strangely hot tail. An extraordinary lightness seemed to spread through his whole body. In the next second, with a whoosh, they were flying upwards through the pipe. Harry could hear Lockhart dangling below him, saying, Amazing! Amazing! It's just like magic! The chill air was whipping through Harry's hair, and before he stopped enjoying the ride, it was over. All four of them were hitting the wet floor of Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. And as Lockhart straightened his hat, the sink that hid the pipe was sliding back into place. Myrtle goggled at him. You're alive, she said, blinking at Harry. There's no need to sound so disappointed, he said grimly, wiping flecks of blood and slime off his glasses. Oh, well, I've been thinking, if you had died, you'd have been welcome to share my toilet, said Myrtle, blushing silver. Ugh, said Ron as they left the bathroom for the dark, deserted corridor outside. Harry, I think Myrtle's got fond of you. You've got competition, Ginny. But tears were still flooding silently down Ginny's face. Where now? Said Ron, with an anxious look at Ginny. Harry pointed. Fawkes was leading the way, glowing gold, along the corridor. They strode after him, and moments later found themselves outside Professor McGonagall's office. Harry knocked and pushed the door open. Chapter 18. Dobby's Reward. For a moment, there was silence as Harry, Ron, Ginny, and Lockhart stood in the doorway, covered in muck and slime and, in Harry's case, blood. Then there was a scream. Ginny! It was Mrs. Weasley, who had been sitting crying in front of the fire. She leapt to her feet, closely followed by Mr. Weasley, and both of them flung themselves on their own daughter. Harry, however, was looking past them. Professor Dumbledore was standing by the mantelpiece, beaming, next to Professor McGonagall, who was taking great, steady gasps, clutching her chest. Fawkes was still whooshing past Harry's ear. Fawkes went whooshing past Harry's ear and settled on Dumbledore's shoulder, just as Harry found himself and Ron being swept into Mrs. Weasley's tight embrace. You saved her! You saved her! How did you do it? I think we'd all like to know that, said Professor Dumbledore weakly. Mrs. Weasley let go of Harry, who hesitated for a moment, and then walked over to the desk and laid upon it the sorting hat, the ruby-encrusted sword, and what remained... Oh, okay. So I'm going to read you the facts on this page because it's interesting. This is about... All right, so we're going to learn about phoenixes here. The phoenix lives to an immense age as it can regenerate, bursting into flames when its body begins to fail and rising again from the ashes as a chick. Phoenixes will regurgitate indigestible plant material as pellets. These are highly sought after both for their medicinal properties and for their peculiar appearance of gemstones within. These rare stones, or phoenix flint, are said to afford protection from cold in high places to those who wear them. Phoenix eggs are glossy green or blue in color. They require no incubation, but may not hatch for several years. Phoenixes are notoriously tricky birds to raise or domesticate, largely due to their uncanny ability to vanish at will. Phoenix song is unmistakable, musical, haunting, and very loud. It is reputed to increase the courage of the pure of heart and to strike fear into the hearts of the impure. Phoenix tears have powerful healing properties. Phoenix feathers possess magical properties and are employed in the manufacture of wands, staffs, and amulets. The vane feathers emit a faint light. Tail feathers are hot to the touch. Okay, so upon the desk he laid the sorting hat, the ruby-encrusted sword, and what remained of Riddle's diary. Then he started telling them everything. For nearly a quarter of an hour he spoke into the rapt silence. He told them about hearing the disembodied voice, how Hermione had finally realized that he was hearing a basilisk in the pipes, how he and Ron had followed the spiders into the forest, that Aragog had told them where the last victim of the basilisk had died, how he had guessed that Moaning Myrtle had been that victim, and that the entrance of the Chamber of Secrets might be in her bathroom. Very well, Professor McGonagall prompted him as he paused. So you found out where the entrance was, breaking 100 school rolls into pieces along the way, I might add. But how on earth did you get out of there alive, Potter? So Harry, his voice now growing hoarse from all that talking, told them about Fawkes's timely arrival and about the sorting hat giving him the sword. But then he faltered. He had so far avoided mentioning Riddle's diary or Ginny. She was standing with her head against Mrs. Weasley's shoulder, and tears were streaming silently down her cheeks. What if they expelled her? Harry thought in panic. Riddle's diary didn't work anymore. How could they prove it had been he who'd made her do it at all? Indistinctively, Harry looked at Dumbledore, who smiled faintly, and the firelight glancing off his half-moon spectacles. What interests me most, said Dumbledore gently, is how Lord Voldemort managed to enchant Ginny when my sources tell me he is currently in hiding in the forests of Albania. Relief, warm, sweeping, glorious relief, swept over Harry. What's that? Said Mr. Weasley in a stunned voice. You know who? Enchant Ginny? But Ginny's not... Ginny hasn't... Has she? It was this diary, said Harry quickly, picking it up and showing it to Dumbledore. Riddle wrote in it when he was 16. Dumbledore took the diary from Harry and peered keenly down his long, crooked nose at its burnt and soggy pages. Brilliant, he said softly. Of course, he was probably the most brilliant student Hogwarts has ever seen. He turned around to the Weasleys, who were looking utterly bewildered. Very few people know that Lord Voldemort was once called Tom Riddle. I taught him myself 50 years ago, at Hogwarts. He disappeared after leaving the school, traveled far and wide, sank so deeply into the dark arts, consorted with the very worst of our kind, underwent so many dangerous magical transformations that when he resurfaced as Lord Voldemort, he was barely recognizable. Hardly anyone connected Lord Voldemort with the clever, handsome boy who had once been head boy here. But Ginny, said Miss Weasley, what's our Ginny got to do with him? His diary, Ginny sobbed. I've been writing in it, and he's been writing back all year. Ginny, said Mr. Weasley, flabbergasted, haven't I taught you anything? What have I always told you? Never trust anything that can think for itself if you can't see where it keeps its brain. Why didn't you show the diary to me, or your mother? A suspicious object like that, it was clearly full of dark magic. I didn't know, sobbed Ginny. I found it inside one of the books Mom gave me. I thought someone had left it in there or forgotten about it. Miss Weasley should go up to the hospital wing straight away, said Dumbledore, interrupted in a firm voice. This has been a terrible ordeal for her. There will be no punishment. Older and wiser wizards than her have been hoodwinked by Lord Voldemort. He strode over to the door and opened it. Bed rest and probably a large steaming mug of hot chocolate. I always find that cheers me up, he added, twinkling fondly down at her. You will find that Madame Pomfrey is still awake. She's just given out mandrake juice. I dare say the basilisk victims will be waking up at any moment. So Hermione's okay, said Ron brightly. There has been no lasting harm done, said Dumbledore. Miss Weasley led Ginny out, and Mr. Weasley followed, still looking deeply shaken. You know, Minerva, Professor Dumbledore said thoughtfully to Professor McGonagall, I think all this merits a good feast. Might I ask you to go and alert the kitchens? Right, said Professor McGonagall crisply, also moving to the door. I'll leave you to deal with Potter and Weasley, shall I? Certainly, said Dumbledore. She left, and Harry and Ron gazed uncertainly at Dumbledore. What exactly had Professor McGonagall meant deal with them? Surely they weren't about to be punished. I seem to remember telling you both that I would have to expel you if you broke any more school rules, said Dumbledore. Ron opened his mouth in horror. Which goes to show that the best of us must sometimes eat our words, Dumbledore went on smiling. You will both receive special awards for service to the school. And let me think. Yes, I think 200 points apiece for Gryffindor. Ron went as brightly pink as Lockhart's Valentine's flowers and closed his mouth again. But one of us seems to be keeping mighty quiet about his part in this dangerous adventure, Dumbledore added. Why so modest, Gilderoy? Harry gave a start. He had completely forgotten about Lockhart. He turned and saw that Lockhart was standing in a corner of the room, still wearing his vague smile. When Dumbledore addressed him, Lockhart looked over his shoulder to see who he was talking to. Professor Dumbledore, Ron said quickly, there was an accident down in the Chamber of Secrets. Professor Lockhart... Am I a professor? Said Lockhart in mild surprise. Goodness, I expect I was hopeless, wasn't I? I expect I was hopeless, was I? He tried to do a memory charm and the wand backfired, Ron explained quietly to Dumbledore. Dear me, said Dumbledore, shaking his head, his long silver moustache quivering. Impaled upon your own sword, Gilderoy. Sword, said Lockhart dimly. Haven't got a sword. That boy has, though, pointed at Harry. He'll lend you one. Would you mind taking Professor Lockhart up to the hospital wing, too? Dumbledore said to Ron. I'd like a few more words with Harry. Lockhart ambled out. Harry cast a curious look back at Dumbledore, and Harry as he closed the door. Dumbledore crossed to one of the chairs by the fire. Sit down, Harry, he said, and Harry sat, feeling unaccountably nervous. "First of all, Harry, I want to thank you," said Dumbledore, eyes twinkling again. "You must have shown me real loyalty down there in the chamber. Nothing but that could have called Fawkes to you." He stroked the phoenix, which had fluttered down onto his knee. Harry grinned awkwardly as Dumbledore watched him. "And so you met Tom Riddle," said Dumbledore thoughtfully. "I imagine he was most interested in you." Suddenly, something that was nagging at Harry came tumbling out of his mouth. "Professor Dumbledore, Riddle said I'm like him. Strange likeness," he said. "Did he now?" said Dumbledore, looking thoughtful under his thick silver eyebrows at Harry. "And what do you think, Harry?" "I don't think I'm like him," said Harry more loudly than he intended. "I mean, I'm in Gryffindor. But he fell silent, a lurking doubt resurfacing in his mind. "Professor," he started again after a moment, "the Sorting Hat told me I'd have done well in Slytherin. Even thought I was Slytherin's heir for a while because I could speak Parseltongue." "You can speak Parseltongue, Harry," said Dumbledore calmly, "because Lord Voldemort, who is the last remaining descendant of Salazar Slytherin, can speak Parseltongue. Unless I'm much mistaken, he transferred some of his own power to you the night he gave you that scar. Not something he intended to do, I'm sure." "Voldemort put a bit of himself in me?" Harry said, thunderstruck. "It certainly seems so." "So I should be in Slytherin," Harry said, looking desperately into Dumbledore's face. "The Sorting Hat could see Slytherin's power in me, and it—" "Put you in Gryffindor," said Dumbledore calmly. "Listen to me, Harry. You happen to have many qualities Salazar Slytherin prized in his hand-picked students. His very own rare gift, Parseltongue, resourcefulness, determination, a certain disregard for the rules," he added, his mustache quivering again. "Yet the Sorting Hat placed you in Gryffindor. You know why that was, I think." "It only put me in Gryffindor," said Harry in a defeated voice, "because I asked not to go in Slytherin." "Exactly," said Dumbledore, beaming once more, "which makes you very different from Tom Riddle. It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." Harry sat motionless in his chair, stunned. "If you want proof, Harry, that you belong in Gryffindor, I suggest you look more closely at this." Dumbledore reached across to Professor McGonagall's desk and picked up the blood-stained silver sword and handed it to Harry. Dully, Harry turned it over, the rubies blazing in the firelight, and then he saw the name engraved just below the hilt. "Godric Gryffindor." "Only a true Gryffindor could have pulled that from the hat, Harry," said Dumbledore simply. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and then Dumbledore pulled open one of the drawers in Professor McGonagall's desk and took out a quill and a bottle of ink. "What you need, Harry, is some food and sleep. I suggest you go down to the feast while I write to Azkaban. We need our gamekeeper back. And I must drop an advertisement for the Daily Prophet, too," he added thoughtfully. "We will be needing a new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. Dear me, we do seem to run through them, don't we?" Harry got up and crossed to the door. He had just reached for the handle, however, when the door burst open so violently that it bounced off the walls. Lucius Malfoy stood there, fury in his face, and cowering under his arm, heavily wrapped in band-aids, was Dobby. "Good evening, Lucius," said Dumbledore pleasantly. Mr. Malfoy almost knocked Harry over as he swept into the room. Dobby came scurrying in after him, crouching at the hem of his cloak, a look of abject horror on his face. "So," said Lucius Malfoy, his cold eyes fixed on Dumbledore, "you've come back. The governor suspended you, but you saw fit to return to Hogwarts." "Well, you see, Lucius," said Dumbledore, smiling serenely, "the other 11 governors contacted me today. It was something like being caught in a hailstorm of owls, to tell the truth. They'd heard that Arthur Weasley's daughter had been killed and wanted me back here at once. They seemed to think I was the best man for the job after all. Very strange tale they told me, too. Several of them seemed to think that you had threatened to curse their families if they didn't agree to suspend me in the first place. Mr. Malfoy went even paler than usual, but his eyes were still slits of fury. So, have you stopped the attacks yet? He sneered. Have you caught the culprit? We have, said Dumbledore with a smile. Well, said Mr. Malfoy sharply, who is it? The same person as last time, Lucius, said Dumbledore, but this time Lord Voldemort was acting through somebody else, by means of this diary. He held up the small black book with the large hole through the center, watching Mr. Malfoy closely. Harry, however, was watching Dobby. The elf was doing something very odd. His great eyes fixed meaningfully on Harry. He kept pointing at the diary, then at Mr. Malfoy, then hitting himself hard over the head with his fists. I see, said Mr. Malfoy slowly to Dumbledore. A clever plan, said Dumbledore in a level voice, still staring Malfoy straight in the eye. Because if Harry here... Mr. Malfoy shot Harry a swift, sharp look, and his friend Ron hadn't discovered this book, why, Ginny Weasley might have taken all the blame. No one would ever have been able to prove she hadn't acted of her own free will. Mr. Malfoy said nothing. His face was suddenly mask-like. And imagine, Dumbledore went on, what might have happened then. The Weasleys are one of the most prominent pure-blood families. Imagine the effect on Arthur Weasley and his Muggle Protection Act if his own daughter was discovered attacking and killing Muggleborns. Very fortunate the diary was discovered and Riddle's memories wiped from it. Who knows what the consequences might have been otherwise? Mr. Malfoy forced himself to speak. Very fortunate, he said stiffly. And still, behind his back, Dobby was pointing first at the diary, then at Lucius Malfoy, and then punching himself in the head. And Harry suddenly understood. He nodded at Dobby, and Dobby backed into a corner, still twisting his ears in punishment. Do you know how Ginny got a hold of that diary, Mr. Malfoy? Said Harry. Lucius Malfoy rounded on him. How should I know how the stupid little girl got a hold of it? He said. Because you gave it to her, said Harry, in Flourish and Blots. You picked up her old Transfiguration book and slipped the diary inside it, didn't you? He saw Mr. Malfoy's white hands clench and unclench. Prove it, he hissed. Oh, no one will be able to do that, said Dumbledore, smiling at Harry. Not now that Riddle has vanished from the book. On the other hand, I would advise you, Lucius, not to go giving out any more of Lord Voldemort's old school things. If any more of them find their way into innocent hands, I think Arthur Weasley, for one, will make sure that they are traced back to you. Lucius Malfoy stood for a moment, and Harry distinctly saw his right foot twitch as though he was longing to reach for his wand, right hand twitch. Instead, he turned to his house elf. We're going, Dobby. He wrenched open the door, and as the elf came hurrying up to him, he kicked him right through it. You could hear Dobby squealing with pain all down the corridor. Harry stood for a moment, thinking back, and then it came to him. Professor Dumbledore, he said hurriedly, can I give that diary back to Mr. Malfoy, please? Certainly, Harry, said Dumbledore calmly. But hurry, the feast, remember? Harry grabbed the diary and dashed out of the office. He could hear Dobby's squeals of pain receding around the corner. Quickly, wondering if this plan could possibly work, Harry took off one of his shoes, pulled off his slimy, filthy sock, and stuffed the diary into it. And then he ran down the dark corridor. He caught up with them at the top of the stairs. Mr. Malfoy! He gasped, getting to a halt. I've got something for you! And then he forced the smelly sock into Lucius Malfoy's hands. What the... Mr. Malfoy ripped the sock off the diary and threw it aside, still looking furiously from the ruined book to Harry. You'll meet the same sticky end as your parents one day, Harry Potter, he said softly. They were meddlesome fools, too. He turned to go. Come, Dobby! I said come! But Dobby didn't move. He was holding up Harry's disgusting, slimy sock and looking at it as though it was priceless treasure. Master has given Dobby a sock, said the elf in wonderment. Master gave it to Dobby. What's that? Spat Mr. Malfoy. What did you say? Dobby has got a sock, said Dobby in disbelief. Master threw it, and Dobby caught it. And Dobby is free. Lucius Malfoy stood frozen, staring at the elf, and then he lunged at Harry. You've lost me my servant, boy! But Dobby shouted, You shall not harm Harry Potter! There was a loud bang, and Mr. Malfoy was thrown backwards. He crashed down the stairs 3 at a time, landing in a crumpled heap on the landing below. He got up, his face livid. He pulled out his wand, but Dobby raised a long, threatening finger. You shall go now, he said fiercely, pointing down at Mr. Malfoy. You shall not touch Harry Potter. You shall go now. Lucius Malfoy had no choice. With a last incensed stare at the pair of them, he swung his cloak around him and hurried out of sight. Harry Potter freed Dobby, said the elf shrilly, gazing at Harry, moonlight from the nearest window reflected in his orb-like eyes. Harry Potter set Dobby free. Least I could do, Dobby, said Harry, grinning. Just promise never to try and save my life again. The elf's ugly brown face split suddenly into a wide, toothy grin. I've just got one question, Dobby, said Harry as Dobby pulled on Harry's sock with shaking hands. You told me all of this had nothing to do with He Who Must Not Be Named, remember? Well? It was a clue, sir, said Dobby, his eyes widening as though it was obvious. Dobby was giving you a clue. The Dark Lord, before he changed his name, could be freely named, you see? Right, said Harry weakly. Well, I'd better go. There's a feast, and my friend Hermione should be awake by now. Dobby threw his arms around Harry's middle and hugged him. Harry Potter is greater by far than Dobby knew, he sobbed. Farewell, Harry Potter. And with a final loud crack, Dobby disappeared. All right, I'm going to show you these pictures before I forget. We're almost done. All right, so we have the sword of Godric Gryffindor. With its ruby encrusted hilt. And then adorable Dobby with Harry Potter's sock. Dobby is free. Master gave Dobby a sock. I think Dobby's voice is my favorite to make. Harry had been to several Hogwarts feasts, but never one quite like this. Everybody was in their pajamas, and the celebrations lasted all night. Harry didn't know whether the best bit was Hermione running towards him screaming, "You solved it! You solved it!" or Justin hurrying over from the Hufflepuff table to wring his hand and apologize endlessly for suspecting him. Or Hagrid turning up at 3:30, cuffing Harry and Ron so hard on the shoulders that they were knocked onto their plates of trifle. Or his and Ron's 400 points securing Gryffindor the House Cup for the 2nd year running. Or Professor McGonagall standing up to tell them all that the exams had been cancelled as a school treat. "Oh no," said Hermione. Or Dumbledore announcing that, unfortunately, Professor Lockhart would be unable to return next year, owing to the fact that he needed to go away and get his memory back. Quite a few of the teachers joined in cheering that greet. Quite a few of the teachers joined in the cheering that greeted this news. "Shame," said Ron, helping himself to a jam donut. "He was starting to grow on me." The rest of the summer term passed in a haze of blazing sunshine. Hogwarts was back to normal with only a few small differences. Defense against the dark arts was cancelled. But we've got plenty of practice with that anyway, Ron told a disgruntled Hermione. And Lucius Malfoy had been sacked as the school governor. Draco was no longer strutting around the school as if he owned the place. On the contrary, he looked resentful and sulky. On the other hand, Ginny Weasley was perfectly happy again. Too soon, it was time for the journey back home on the Hogwarts Express. Harry, Ron, Hermione, Fred, George, and Ginny got a compartment to themselves. They made the most of the last few hours in which they were allowed to do magic before the holidays. They played Exploding Snap, set off the very last of Fred and George's filibuster fireworks, and practiced disarming each other by magic. Harry was getting very good at it. They were almost at King's Cross when Harry remembered something. "Ginny, what did you see Percy doing that he didn't want you to tell anyone?" "Oh, that," said Ginny, giggling. "Well, Percy's got a girlfriend." Ron dropped a sack of books on George's head. "What?" "It's a Ravenclaw prefect, Penelope Clearwater," said Ginny. "That's who he was writing to all last summer. He's been meeting her all over the school in secret. I walked in on them kissing in an empty classroom one day. He was so upset when she was, attacked." "You won't tease him, will you?" she said anxiously. "Wouldn't dream of it," said Fred, who was looking as if his birthday had come early. "Definitely not," said George, snickering. The Hogwarts Express slowed and finally stopped. Harry pulled out his quill and a bit of parchment and turned to Ron and Hermione. "This is called the telephone number," he told Ron, scribbling it twice, tearing the parchment in two and handing it to them. "I told your dad how to use a telephone last summer. He'll know. Call me at the Dursleys, okay? I can't stand another 2 months with only Dudley to talk to." "Your aunt and uncle will be proud, though, won't they?" said Hermione, as they got off the train and joined the crowd thronging towards the enchanted barrier. "When they heard what you did this year?" "Proud?" said Harry. "Are you mad? All those times I could have died and I didn't manage it? They'll be furious." That was the Hogwarts Express. You heard the train. And together they walked back through the gateway to the Muggle world. And that, my lovelies, is the end of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. That was wonderful. Thank you guys for listening. I don't know what else we can talk about. That was my favorite book, though. I'm getting a little better at this whole reading thing. Yeah, maybe a little bit. Not really. All right. I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you listening. I love each and every one of my watchers, viewers. I think there's, 2 of you, because Angie doesn't show up. Anyway, have a lovely evening, and either tomorrow or the day after, we will start Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Because our lovely Angie bought the book for me so that we can start reading it. Love you guys. Good night.